People think monsters live in dark alleys or haunted houses. Mine lived in my living room, and he called me Mom. If anyone had told me years ago that my own son would raise his hand against me, I would have laughed. Ethan was my pride, my miracle child, the boy I had raised alone after his father's death. He was polite, brilliant, and loved by everyone who met him. But behind closed doors, he became someone else entirely, a man whose anger burned hotter than reason, whose control over me grew quieter but stronger with every passing day. It didn't start with a beating. It started with a bowl of soup, a simple, stupid bowl of soup that didn't have enough salt. But what Ethan didn't know was that fear, when pushed too far, eventually transforms into something else, resistance. And the day I decided to fight back, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply picked up the phone, made a call, and set in motion a plan that would change both our lives forever. This is not just the story of a mother's suffering. It's the story of what happens when a woman who has been silent for too long finally decides to speak and makes her abuser listen. The night it happened, the house smelled of chicken broth and rosemary. I had spent the afternoon cooking, humming softly, trying to pretend things were normal. Ethan was coming home late from work again. He said there had been problems with payroll, and I wanted to make his favorite meal. The soup simmered on the stove, rich and warm, but when I tasted it, I realized I'd forgotten the salt. I reached for the shaker, but the door opened, and he stepped in. The heaviness in his footsteps told me he was already angry about something. "Dinner ready?" he asked flatly, dropping his keys on the counter. I smiled the way mothers do when they're afraid to make a mistake. "Just a minute," I said. "The soup's hot." He sat down, scrolling through his phone, and I ladled it into his bowl. The moment he tasted it, his expression hardened. "You can't even do one thing right," he said quietly. "One thing." "I just forgot the salt," I replied, but my voice trembled. His hand hit the table so hard the spoon jumped. "You don't forget things when I tell you to do them." Before I could move, the slap came, sharp, clean, like the crack of a whip. My cheek burned, and for a second I couldn't breathe. The soup spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor, mingling with my tears. Ethan stood over me, chest heaving, eyes wild. "Don't you dare cry," he said. "You always play the victim." "You think anyone would believe you over me?" That night, I cleaned the floor in silence while he went upstairs, muttering about ungrateful women. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, pressing ice against my face, thinking about the man I had raised, the boy I once sang to sleep with lullabies. It wasn't the missing salt that broke me. It was realizing that the son I loved more than anything had learned to enjoy my fear. And deep down, I knew that slap wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Morning came like a punishment. I woke with my face pressed against the edge of the couch, the same couch I had collapsed on after cleaning up the spilled soup. My jaw ached when I moved it. The skin on my left cheek had already started to swell, and a dull purple shadow bloomed beneath my eye. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the sunlight crawling across the floorboards. It was a new day, but it didn't feel new at all. It felt like the same quiet ache, replaying itself under a different sky. When I finally stood up, my body felt heavier than it should have. My reflection in the hallway mirror stopped me cold. The woman looking back wasn't me, not the version of me I used to know. My hair was matted, my lips dry and cracked, and the bruise on my face stretched like an ugly confession I hadn't meant to write. I touched it gently, and the pain brought tears I didn't want to shed. But behind the swelling and shame, I saw something I hadn't noticed in a long time, a flicker, a spark. It was faint, but it was there. Ethan was still upstairs, asleep in his room. His door was half shut, just enough for me to see the sneakers I'd bought him for his new job at the garage, $139 from the Nike store, paid for with the money I had been saving to fix the leaky sink. I remembered how proud I felt when he got that job. I told everyone my son was finally turning his life around. I wanted to believe it so badly that I ignored all the little signs, the mood swings, The nights he came home smelling of whiskey. The way his voice shifted from loving to cruel in a heartbeat. I tiptoed into the kitchen, careful not to wake him. The smell of dried soup still lingered, sour and heavy. I began cleaning again, scrubbing the floor as if erasing every trace of the night before might somehow erase what had happened. But no amount of soap could wash away the memory of his words or the sting in my skin. The phone on the counter buzzed. It was a message from my sister, Clara. She lived 3 states away in Ohio and had texted last night after I missed our usual call. "Everything okay? You're quiet lately." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. "Just tired." "Been cooking too much lately," I deleted it, then tried again. "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. I hadn't been for years. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands trembled. The old clock above the stove ticked steadily, each second reminding me of how trapped I'd become. I had spent decades being everyone's caretaker, my late husband's nurse during his illness, Ethan's provider after his father died, the neighbor who brought soup to the sick and volunteered at the church pantry. But who had taken care of me? A loud thud upstairs made me jump, then silence, then footsteps, Ethan's. I quickly pulled the collar of my robe higher, hoping it would hide the bruise. He came down yawning, his hair messy, pretending as though nothing had happened. "Morning," he said casually, opening the fridge. "We got any eggs left?" I couldn't answer. My voice caught in my throat. He glanced at me, his eyes briefly softening, then hardening again. "You gonna stand there staring, or you gonna make breakfast?" I swallowed the fear and nodded. "Of course." As I cracked the eggs into the pan, I realized something had changed in me overnight. The fear was still there, but underneath it, there was something else. A low, steady hum of anger. Not the kind that explodes outward, but the kind that sits deep in your chest, patient and dangerous. When he left for work, I stood by the window watching him walk down the street, laughing into his phone like an ordinary young man. My son, my abuser, my heartbreak in human form. That afternoon, I cleaned the house again, not because it needed it, but because movement felt like control. I put the kettle on, sat down at the table, and opened the small notebook I kept for grocery lists. On a blank page, I wrote 3 words. This must end. I didn't know how yet. I had $73 left in my checking account, 2 bruises that would take weeks to fade, and no plan. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman waking up, not just to bruises, but to the truth that survival doesn't begin when the pain stops. It begins when you decide you deserve more than fear. And that morning, staring at my reflection one last time, I whispered to the woman in the mirror, "You're not done yet." The next Sunday came with the sound of laughter on our front porch. Ethan was outside, helping Mrs. Green from next door carry her groceries. She adored him. "Your son is a blessing, Marjorie," she said, her voice bright as sunlight. "Always helping, always so polite. You raised him right." I smiled from the doorway, my cheeks still faintly yellow from healing. "Yes," I said softly. "I did my best." Everyone believed Ethan was the kind of man mothers prayed for. He'd fix neighbors' cars without charging them a dime, donate to church drives, and hand out $20 bills to the kids selling lemonade in summer. When the church held its annual Thanksgiving raffle, he bought 20 tickets just to help the cause. People noticed that. They said things like, "He's such a good son." They didn't see the side of him that slammed doors, hurled insults like daggers, or shoved me so hard one night I hit the kitchen counter. The same man who told the pastor he wanted to start a charity fund was the one who once ripped my grocery list in half because I forgot to buy his favorite beer. To the world, he was polished, a golden boy. To me, he was unpredictable, his moods swinging like a pendulum between charm and cruelty. He'd come home from work, toss $200 in cash on the table and say, "Here, Mom, go treat yourself." I'd thank him, though I never spent it. I knew the money wasn't generosity, it was hush money. It meant, don't tell anyone, don't ruin the image. That money usually went to bills or fixing something around the house he had broken in one of his outbursts. Ethan loved being admired. He'd beam when neighbors praised him for buying me that new microwave or taking me out to dinner on Mother's Day. But they didn't know how carefully those moments were curated. They didn't see the silent rehearsals before we stepped outside, the quick whispers, smile, don't look tired, don't make me look bad. I learned to follow the script, my smile painted on like stage makeup. My friends from church envied me. "You're lucky," one said as we arranged flowers for the Sunday service. "Most sons don't care for their mothers like Ethan does." I wanted to tell her that sometimes love can look perfect on the outside while it rots quietly within. But I only nodded. The truth had become a dangerous language in our house, one I no longer spoke freely. At night, when the world went quiet, I'd hear him pacing. The creak of the floorboards was my warning sign. I'd lie in bed, still as a statue, listening. Sometimes he'd stop outside my door and whisper things I couldn't understand. Other times he'd just stand there breathing. Those moments were worse than the shouting. They made me feel like prey waiting for the hunter's next move. Yet the next morning, he'd brew coffee, pour me a cup, and kiss my forehead before leaving for work. "Love you, Mom," he'd say casually, like nothing had happened. And I'd respond, "Love you too," because what else could I say? The truth would have shattered the fragile world we both pretended to live in. The mask he wore fooled everyone, but what scared me most was how well it had begun to fool me too. I caught myself remembering the boy he used to be, the one who made me birthday cards out of construction paper and brought me dandelions from the yard. I kept trying to find him beneath the man who now controlled every breath I took, but every time I looked, I found nothing but that mask staring back. It started small, like most things do. One afternoon, Ethan came home with a stack of envelopes from the mailbox, bills, letters, and the usual pension notice from the bank. He stood by the counter, flipping through them with an air of importance. "You really shouldn't worry about these, Mom," he said. "Let me handle it." "You've done enough." I wanted to believe him. He said it with that same protective tone he'd used since his father died, the one that made me feel cared for. But back then, I didn't realize care and control could wear the same face. The first time I handed him my bank card, it was supposed to be temporary. My arthritis had been bad that month, and signing receipts had become difficult. "Just for now," I told him. "Just until my hands get better." He smiled and kissed my forehead. "Of course, Mom. I'll make sure everything's taken care of." And he did, at first. The electricity bill was paid on time, the groceries were stocked, and he even surprised me with a new set of curtains for the living room, $84.99 from Home Goods, receipt neatly folded in the bag. I remember thinking how thoughtful he was. But gradually, the details began to change. He started handling all my mail. "You don't need to bother with this stuff," he'd say, waving off letters from the pension office. Then one day, my card disappeared completely. "I'll keep it safe," he said, slipping it into his wallet. "You always forget your PIN." I stopped getting my pension statements in the mail. When I asked about them, he told me the bank had switched to paperless notices. "Everything's online now," he explained. "You wouldn't understand." Weeks turned into months, and the questions I asked began to irritate him. "Do you not trust me, Mom?" he'd snap. "After everything I do for you?" And just like that, the guilt would wash over me, silencing every doubt. But one afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. While he was at work, I turned on the old desktop computer he'd set up in the corner of the living room. It had been years since I'd logged into anything, but muscle memory kicked in. The password was still the same as it had always been, my maiden name and the year I was born. When the account finally loaded, I felt my breath catch. There were withdrawals, large ones, $400 here, $600 there, a $1,200 transfer labeled auto expense, another for $950 to an online electronics store. My pension, roughly $2,800 a month, was disappearing faster than I could blink. I scrolled through the months, each transaction painting a clearer picture of betrayal. The balance that should have held years of careful savings was down to just $312.47. My hands trembled on the mouse. My son, the same boy I had sacrificed everything for, was bleeding me dry under the pretense of protection. When he came home that evening, I didn't confront him. I couldn't. I just watched him move around the kitchen, laughing as he told me about his day, oblivious to the storm gathering behind my silence. He had that same confident air, the same polished smile, and I realized then that he wasn't just stealing my money, he was stealing my dignity, piece by piece. That night, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of the clock on the wall, every tick a reminder of how long I had allowed this to happen. I wasn't just losing money, I was losing myself. But something inside me had shifted. If he could erase me one signature at a time, then I could find a way to rewrite my story, one secret at a time. Savannah had one of those smiles that could light up a room, soft, practiced, and polite. She came over every other weekend, carrying a box of pastries from the little bakery downtown and calling me Miss Marjorie, as if I were someone she truly respected. I wanted to like her. In a way, I did. She was gentle, with careful manners and a quiet laugh that filled the spaces where Ethan's temper usually lived. But even her laughter couldn't drown out the tension that clung to the walls whenever he was near. She always arrived right after Ethan had been paid. He'd swagger through the door with his arm around her, waving a grocery bag like some kind of trophy. "Look what Savannah picked up for dinner," he'd say, dropping it on the counter, steaks, wine, sometimes even imported chocolates that cost $18 a box. The table would be set, candles lit, laughter forced. To anyone else, it might have looked like a happy little family. To me, it was theater again, the same performance I'd been trapped in for years. Savannah was careful, though. She didn't ask questions when Ethan snapped at me for setting the table wrong or for speaking when he was watching TV. She smiled through it, sipping her wine, pretending not to notice the shift in his tone. Once, when he left the room, she reached across the table and whispered, "He just gets stressed, Miss Marjorie. You know how men are." Her voice was kind, but her eyes betrayed her. She did know. She just didn't want to face it. The night she saw the bruises, it was late. Ethan had gone out with friends, leaving behind the half-empty bottle of whiskey and a trail of resentment. I was washing dishes when she came into the kitchen, her heels clicking softly on the tile. "I'll help you," she said, rolling up her sleeves. The warm water stung my arms, and I flinched. That's when she saw it, the dark purple band just below my elbow, shaped like fingers. Her smile faltered, her breath caught, and for a second, I thought she might say something, but she didn't. Her eyes met mine, then darted away. She dried her hands on a towel and said quietly, "I should probably go. It's late." She left without another word. When the front door closed, the silence that followed was heavier than any shout. I stood there staring at the sink, realizing what her silence meant. It wasn't just fear, it was self-preservation. She wasn't blind, she was surviving just like I was. After that night, she came by less often. When she did, she brought flowers, as if they could disguise the growing distance. Once she left an envelope on the kitchen table with $100 inside and a note that said, "For you." Just because I never asked why. I didn't want to know what guilt had cost her. Sometimes I heard her crying outside when Ethan's voice rose, muffled through her car window. I'd stand by the curtain, watching her wipe her tears before driving off, knowing she'd come back anyway. Silence has a strange way of binding people. It keeps peace on the surface while everything underneath rots. Savannah and I shared that silence, not as friends, but as two women caught in the orbit of a man who thrived on control. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, her forgotten coffee cup still warm in my hands. For the first time, I didn't feel angry at her for turning away. I understood. Seeing the truth means you have to act, and acting means risking everything. But as I traced the rim of that cup, I promised myself something. I would not spend the rest of my life pretending not to see. After Savannah stopped coming around, the house grew quieter, but not peaceful. Ethan filled the silence with small, invisible weapons, words that chipped away at my sense of reality. They didn't leave bruises, not the kind anyone could see, but they left marks all the same. Clarice had lived next door for almost 20 years, but until that night, I'd never truly seen her. She was the kind of neighbor who knew the rhythm of everyone's life, when trash bins went out, when mail came, when someone's porch light stayed on too long. A retired nurse and a widow of 12 years, she carried herself with the calm of someone who had already seen the worst life could offer. That evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the electric bill receipt I'd found. Tracing the faded numbers, $128.50, over and over with my thumb, as if memorizing proof that my sanity still existed. There was a knock at the door, soft but deliberate. When I opened it, Clarice stood there holding a covered plate wrapped in foil. "Made too much gumbo," she said simply, her smile polite but her eyes serious. "And I thought you could use a little company." For a moment, I almost turned her away. Ethan would be home soon, and he didn't like unplanned visits. But something about her tone, gentle, unthreatening, made me step aside. "Come in," I said. She set the plate down on the counter and looked around. Her gaze lingered on the half-washed dishes, the stack of unopened envelopes, the thin crack in the drywall near the hallway, the one Ethan had punched last spring when I'd misplaced his car keys. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. "More than usual." "I've just been tired," I lied, forcing a smile. Clarice didn't answer right away. Instead, she poured 2 glasses of sweet tea from the pitcher in my fridge and sat down across from me. "Marjorie," she said finally, "I was a nurse for 40 years. I know what a fall looks like, and I know what a bruise from a hand looks like. I've seen both on you." The room went still. My throat tightened. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the words wouldn't come. She reached across the table, her hand warm and steady. "You don't have to explain. Just know I see you." It was such a simple sentence, but it broke something open inside me. For months, I had been invisible, gaslit into silence. Now someone was offering to witness my pain without judgment, without questions. She continued quietly. "I've heard shouting, late at night. I've seen him take your mail. I didn't want to interfere, but I can't stay silent anymore. You don't deserve this." Tears came before I could stop them. I covered my face with both hands, embarrassed by how fast they fell. Clarice didn't move closer, didn't press. She just sat there, letting me cry until the shaking stopped. "Ethan, he controls everything," I whispered finally. "My money, my phone, even what I cook. I can't leave. I don't even have access to my own pension anymore." Clarice nodded. "You're not crazy," she said, "and you're not alone. There are ways out, but you'll need proof and patience." Before she left, she handed me a small notebook. "Write things down," she said. "Dates, times, what he says, what he takes. Keep it hidden, but don't stop writing. Paper remembers what people want you to forget." After she left, I lifted the foil from the gumbo. It was still warm, fragrant with shrimp and sausage. I hadn't eaten something that comforting in months. As I took the first spoonful, I realized how long it had been since someone had shown me kindness without condition. That night I hid the notebook inside the same cookbook where I'd found the electric bill receipt. For the first time, I felt like I had a quiet weapon of my own, the truth. Clarice hadn't just brought me dinner. She'd brought me a lifeline. It happened on a Wednesday morning, the kind of day that began with routine and ended with revelation. The air smelled like rain, that sharp, clean scent that seeps through open windows before a storm. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the one with a faint burn mark from when Ethan slammed his cigarette down during an argument, writing quietly in the small blue notebook Clarice had given me. Its pages were soft now, corners curled from my nervous fingers. I wrote down everything I could remember, as precisely as I could, dates, amounts, and the little details of his temper that used to slip through my memory like smoke. March 3rd, withdrew $2,500 from our joint savings, said it was for car repairs, but no invoice ever came. April 12th, shouted because dinner was late, punched the cabinet, broke the mug I got from Portland, cost to replace $18. May 6th, $640 missing from the insurance refund, claimed it was an online error. June 2nd, threw his phone at the wall, screen cracked, $320 to repair, charged to my card. July 9th, called me forgetful, paranoid, took my keys, said it was for my own safety. I wrote until the ink bled through the paper, until the words blurred from tears I didn't realize had fallen. Each line was evidence, not just of theft, but of erosion. How slowly he'd stripped away my confidence, my autonomy, my sense of self. The numbers made it real again. They were the map of how control had crept in, dollar by dollar, word by word. Clarice had told me, "Write it all down, dear. The truth likes a record." At first I thought it was pointless, just scribbles in a secret book. But now, as thunder rolled in the distance, I understood she'd given me a weapon disguised as a gift. The sound of rain began to drum against the window, steady and rhythmic. I kept writing. August 18th, I found the garden camera again, memory card still inside, left it untouched. September 1st, bank balance lower by $4,200. Ethan said it was a business investment, account in his name only. By the time I closed the notebook, my hand ached, but my heart felt strangely lighter. Each detail I wrote was a piece of myself I was reclaiming, proof that I hadn't imagined it, that the lies had been real, measurable, and cruel. The rain grew heavier, drowning out the silence. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving the story. I was documenting it. The act of writing made me feel sane, even if I still felt trapped. The phone rang around 10:15 a.m., its sharp tone startling me. The caller ID read Midland Savings Bank. I almost didn't answer. Ethan handled all my banking, or so he said, and I didn't want to anger him by meddling. But something, maybe that stubborn spark Clarice had reignited, made me pick it up. "Mrs. Davis?" a man's voice said, polite and professional. "This is Daniel from Midland Savings. I'm calling to confirm a withdrawal request made this morning, $3,500 from your savings account." My hand tightened around the phone. "That's not possible," I said quickly. "I didn't make any withdrawal." There was a brief pause. Papers shuffled. "I see. The transaction was made online through your account credentials. It appears consistent with previous transfers. Would you like me to read some of those for verification?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, please." He listed them. $2,000 last month, $1,200 the month before, $800 before that, all from the account I thought held my retirement cushion, the savings I'd built from 40 years of work at the firm. My pension deposits went in every month, $1,350 like clockwork, but apparently they hadn't been staying there for long. I felt the air leave my lungs. "I never approved any of those," I whispered. "I understand," Daniel said gently. "I'm going to freeze the account temporarily while we investigate. In the meantime, you might want to review any shared access." Shared access. The phrase hit me like a slap. Ethan had insisted on linking his email to my bank for security reasons. He'd even told me my account number was complicated and that he'd keep it safe. My own son had been siphoning my life savings right under my nose. When I hung up, the house felt colder. I went to my bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept my financial papers, and began pulling everything out. Bank statements, tax receipts, letters from the pension office. Half the pages were missing. The rest were rearranged, as if someone had gone through them and tried to cover their tracks. I found one printed transfer confirmation tucked between two old electric bills, $5,000 wired to an account under the name E.J. Davis Holdings, LLC, an entity I had never heard of. My hands trembled as I read the date. 3 weeks ago. When Ethan came home that evening, I didn't mention the call. I couldn't, not yet. He kissed my cheek absently, the way someone does when they're pretending affection, and said, "Mom, I might need to borrow a little more this month. Things are tight. Borrow." The word nearly made me laugh. I nodded instead, my lips pressed together to keep from screaming. Later that night, when he went to shower, I slipped into his office. His laptop was still open. I didn't know much about technology, but I knew how to look at browser history. My heart pounded as I scrolled. There it was, Midland Savings Bank. Transfer confirmed, $3,500. Then another. Withdrawal, $2,000. Dozens of them. He had been stealing from me for months, maybe years. Every lie, every forgotten bill, every patronizing smile had been part of his control. I closed the laptop and stood in the darkened room, shaking. Clarice's words came back to me. Paper remembers what people want you to forget. So I wrote it all down, the amounts, the dates, the names. That night I didn't sleep, but for the first time in a long while, my fear had purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was preparing. I didn't leave the night I discovered the bank transfers. I wish I could say I did. But leaving isn't a single brave act. It's 1,000 small hesitations stitched together with fear. I told myself I needed proof, that I couldn't just walk away without a plan. The truth was simpler. I was scared. He had taken my money, but he'd also taken something deeper, my belief that I could survive without him. The next morning, I went through my papers again, copying down account numbers and printing every record I could find before he noticed. The printer hummed softly, each page like a heartbeat. $3,500, $2,000, $5,000, all stolen in neat, digital lines. By the time I was done, my folder was thick, nearly an inch high. I hid it in the back of my closet, behind an old box of winter scarves he never touched. Clarice came by that afternoon with her usual knock, 2 quick taps and 1 slow one. She carried a dish of cornbread and a bag of groceries she said were extras. I invited her in, though my voice shook. I hadn't told her what I'd learned yet. When she noticed my trembling hands, she didn't ask questions right away. Instead, she poured 2 cups of tea and said quietly, "You're ready to talk now, aren't you?" The words broke something open. I told her everything, about the missing money, the bruises, the way he'd call me forgetful when I caught him in a lie. Clarice listened without interrupting, her eyes steady. When I finally stopped, she set her cup down and said, "You have to get out, Margaret. He's not just taking your money. He's taking you." The next few days blurred into planning. Clarice helped me call the bank again. Daniel, the same man from before, confirmed the investigation was active. "If you need to restrict his access, we can issue a new card and account," he said. I hesitated before whispering, "Yes. Please." When he told me they'd mail the card to a secure address, I gave Clarice's. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I started packing slowly, quietly. A few clothes in a suitcase, my medication, my late husband's photo. I left behind the fancy china Ethan said wasn't practical for me anymore, and the jewelry he'd pawned for our bills. I didn't even take my phone. He tracked it. Clarice lent me an old flip phone she kept for emergencies. That night, as I zipped the bag shut, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked unfamiliar, older, yes, but there was something else there. Resolve. The hardest part wasn't walking out the door. It was pretending everything was normal until I could. On the 3rd morning, while Ethan went to the store, I slipped across the yard to Clarice's. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might echo. She met me at the door without a word, just opened it and guided me inside. Her house smelled of cinnamon and safety. When I sat down on her sofa, I expected to cry. Instead, I exhaled, one long, shaking breath that felt like the first real one I'd taken in years. Clarice handed me the spare key she'd mentioned. "Just for a few nights," she said gently. But we both knew it was more than that. It was freedom, folded neatly into a borrowed blanket and a borrowed bed. That night, I counted the money I had left, $240 in cash, hidden in an envelope I'd tucked away long ago. Not much, but enough to start. Enough to mean that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't surviving under his roof. I was starting over under mine. The first few nights at Clarice's passed in tense silence. I kept expecting Ethan to appear at the window or call until the phone burned in my hand. Instead, there was nothing, an eerie calm that felt more dangerous than rage. Clarice insisted I stay hidden until we had something solid to protect me. "He's unpredictable now," she said, her voice low. "Men like that don't lose control quietly." She was right. On the 5th night, Ethan came. It started with pounding at the front door, hard, rhythmic knocks that made Clarice grip my hand. "Mom!" he shouted from outside, voice slurred with anger. "You can't hide from me forever!" His words echoed through the dark, bouncing off the garden walls. I stayed silent, crouched behind the curtain, heart hammering. He circled the house twice before leaving, but I knew it wasn't over. What Ethan didn't know was that before I left, I had planted something of my own, a small camera nestled behind the marigolds by the porch. It was a simple model I'd bought months earlier for $79 from a hardware store, intending to watch for stray cats in the yard. Now, it was my quiet witness. Before I ran, I made sure it was charged and angled toward the front steps. I didn't know then how much it would capture. 2 nights after his first visit, he came back. The camera caught it all, his face twisted with fury as he kicked the flower pots, shouting about ungrateful mothers and stolen money. He yanked open the mailbox and tore through the envelopes, scattering them like confetti. Then he smashed the front window with a rock, cursing so loud the microphone distorted. When he realized I wasn't home, he stormed inside anyway, breaking drawers and pulling down curtains. The footage showed him pacing, muttering, his hands trembling as he pocketed jewelry boxes that weren't even his. Clarice and I watched the recording the next morning in stunned silence. "You have him," she whispered finally, her eyes wide. "This is proof." She was right. The video was dated, timed, clear. Every frame told the truth I'd been too afraid to say aloud. I printed still images and brought the footage to Officer Ramirez, the same kind-eyed policeman who'd taken my earlier statement about the stolen money. He watched without interrupting, then exhaled. "Mrs. Hart, this isn't just theft or harassment anymore," he said quietly. "This is criminal intimidation, and we can act on it." He promised to send a patrol by Clarice's house and file for a protective order immediately. When I returned home later that day to collect a few more belongings under police supervision, the place didn't feel like mine anymore. The air smelled of broken things. My favorite teacup was shattered on the floor, and the curtains hung limp, half-torn. But amidst the chaos, the camera still blinked its tiny red light, steady and unbroken, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. As I picked it up, I felt something unexpected, not fear, but relief. The garden that once grew tomatoes and herbs now grew truth. For years I'd been accused of imagining, forgetting, exaggerating. Now I had evidence stronger than any plea. That night, Clarice made tea and handed me the warm cup. "You planted that camera like a seed," she said softly. "And look what grew." I smiled faintly, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. Ethan had taken my peace, my savings, even my sense of reality. But now, with one small act of foresight, I'd taken something back, my voice, recorded and undeniable. And I knew, deep down, the next time he came, he wouldn't just find his mother. He'd find the law waiting for him, too. The morning of his arrest felt strangely quiet, like the world had been holding its breath. I was at Clarice's kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, when Officer Ramirez called. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "we've got him." For a moment, I couldn't move. My fingers tightened around the cup until it slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and final, like something breaking inside me. But not from fear this time, from release. 2 plainclothes detectives from the Jefferson County Financial Crimes Unit had been tracking his activity for days. They'd matched timestamps from the garden camera footage showing him sneaking into my shed with a laptop at 11:47 p.m. with the online transfers to those fake accounts. Each withdrawal had a trail: $3,800 here, $2,150 there, $970 sent through a crypto wallet he thought couldn't be traced. When they cuffed him, he protested like a child caught stealing candy. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, voice trembling but sharp. "That's my mother's account." But the evidence was too clean, too precise. The investigators had my handwritten notes, dates, amounts, and the bank statements Clarice helped me print. All of it lined up perfectly with his movements. The officer shut the door, the sound dull under the drizzle, and for a second, everything went quiet. The siren didn't start until they turned onto Maple Avenue, carrying him toward a future he couldn't manipulate. That afternoon, Detective Alvarez called. "We've got enough for full charges," he said. "Forgery, identity theft, and financial exploitation of an elder. You did the right thing, ma'am." For the first time in years, I didn't doubt it. Clarice drove me to the station, her hands steady on the wheel though mine weren't. When we arrived, I saw the squad car just as they were putting him inside. Ethan looked at me through the glass, his face twisted with disbelief. "Mom!" he shouted, straining against the officers. "You did this to me?" His voice cracked between anger and desperation. I didn't answer. I couldn't. There are no words for the moment you see your child, your only child, in handcuffs, even when you know he earned them. At the courthouse later that day, I sat outside the hearing room, my palms damp and cold. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. A bailiff nodded politely as he passed. Clarice sat beside me, her quiet presence anchoring me to the moment. When they called my name to testify, I rose on shaking legs. Inside, Ethan avoided my eyes. His lawyer, a man in a pinstriped suit, spoke smoothly about family misunderstandings and financial confusion. But the prosecutor had the footage queued up. Ethan's voice, his threats, the moment he shattered the window. When the video played, the courtroom went still. I watched his face as he saw himself, red-eyed, wild, unrecognizable. For the first time, he didn't look defiant. He looked small. The judge denied bail. I heard the words, "held in custody until trial," and a strange numbness washed over me. Relief and grief twisted together in my chest, 2 emotions I couldn't separate. Outside, the press had already gathered. A few reporters called out questions. "Mrs. Hart, is it true your son stole over $20,000? Do you plan to press further charges?" I didn't answer them either. The only voice I wanted to hear was my own heartbeat, steady in my ears. Clarice guided me to her car. "You did what you had to do," she said softly. "You saved yourself." But the truth was heavier than that. Saving myself had meant condemning my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, the teenager who used to bring me daisies from the yard. Now, all I had left of him were police reports and bruises that had faded to pale yellow. That night, I sat alone in Clarice's guest room, the moonlight spilling across the floor. I opened the folder, the same one that had once been filled with stolen numbers, and placed inside the court notice, the restraining order, and a photo of Ethan as a child, smiling with missing teeth. I didn't know if I'd ever see him free again, or if I even wanted to. But I did know this. The screaming from earlier, It was the sound of a man losing control of what he thought he owned. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one apologizing. The silence after his arrest didn't last long. For 3 weeks, I tried to believe the worst was behind me, that bars and guards could contain his anger. I began cooking again, reading, even tending to Clarice's small garden. But healing, I soon learned, is never linear. It was a pale yellow envelope that reminded me of that truth, thin, harmless-looking, and stamped from the county jail. At first, I didn't want to open it. My hands trembled as I turned it over, staring at my own name written in Ethan's familiar scrawl. When I finally did, the smell of cheap ink and cold air hit me. His handwriting slanted angrily across the page. "Mom, you don't know what you've done. I've got things you wouldn't want anyone to see. You'll fix this, or everyone will know who you really are." My stomach turned. The next line was worse, a list of supposed secrets, things he claimed could destroy me. A letter from years ago, an insurance mistake, the time I sold a few antique rings for $800 and never told him. He made it sound like crimes. "If I go down," he wrote, "you're going with me." The following week, another letter arrived, this time pretending to be remorse. "I forgive you," he wrote, "if you'll just help me get out. Tell them you were confused, say the video was a misunderstanding. I'll take care of you again." The words were manipulative, soaked in false warmth. I could almost hear his voice, that practiced softness that always preceded the storm. I didn't respond. Clarice warned me not to. "He's trying to drag you back into the cage," she said. But I kept the letters in a drawer, unable to throw them away, maybe out of fear, maybe out of mourning for the son I'd lost. When the third letter came, it included photocopies, grainy, distorted images of old papers he must have stolen from my drawers, my will, my pension documents, even a photo of me holding him as a baby. On the back of that picture, he'd written, "Don't make me show the world who you really were." I took everything to Officer Ramirez. He read each page silently, his jaw tightening. "He's crossing a line," he said finally. "We'll add these to the case." It's harassment and intimidation. He advised me to block all mail from him, but I hesitated. I needed the evidence. One night I dreamed of him, not the angry man in handcuffs, but the boy who once built me a Mother's Day card out of cereal boxes. When I woke, tears had dried on my face. That morning, a fourth envelope arrived. This time, the tone had changed again, calm, almost cold. "You've made your choice," it read. "Don't be surprised when I make mine." No threats, no apologies, just a quiet promise that made the room feel smaller. Clarice found me sitting by the table staring at the letter. "He's losing his grip," she said gently. "That's what abusers do when they realize they can't control you anymore." I nodded, though my heart pounded. She was right, the bars hadn't stopped him. They'd only given him new weapons, paper, ink, and guilt. But what he didn't understand was that I wasn't the same woman who once trembled at his words. That night, I burned the last letter in Clarice's fireplace. The flames licked across his handwriting, curling the paper into black ash. Watching it disappear, I whispered to no one in particular, "You can't haunt me from there." For the first time, I felt free. Not because he was behind bars, but because I finally was not. The morning after the press conference, I woke to a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt earned. For the first time in years, I didn't wake to threats, to footsteps outside my door, or to the weight of secrets pressing against my chest. Instead, the sun filtered through my curtains, painting the room gold. Clarice had left a note on the kitchen table beside a steaming mug of coffee. "You were brave, Monica. I hope you finally believe it." By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages from journalists, distant relatives, and even old co-workers who had watched the broadcast. Some were shocked. Some were proud. but the one that changed everything came from an unknown number. "This is Raphael Miller," the message read. "Please call me when you can." It's important. Raphael was the financial director at the firm where Ethan had worked. My stomach tightened as I dialed the number, expecting anger, maybe even legal threats. Instead, his voice was calm, warm, almost hesitant. "Mrs. Davis," he said, "I saw your statement yesterday. I think we owe you an apology." That was not what I expected. He asked to meet in Brenda's office later that afternoon. When I arrived, he stood to greet me, impeccably dressed, but visibly emotional. "I came here to say something I should have said months ago," he began. "We all failed to see what was happening. To your son, yes, but especially to you." He paused, then slid a folder across Brenda's desk. Inside were documents, proof that Ethan's thefts had gone much deeper than anyone had realized. "Your son began diverting company funds 2 years before his arrest," Raphael explained. "Small amounts at first, then larger. Over time, he transferred roughly $130,000 to accounts under his control." I felt my breath catch. $130,000? I repeated, my voice almost a whisper. Raphael nodded gravely. "Some of that money passed through your own account, likely without your knowledge. You were part of his scheme, but unknowingly, and that's something we intend to make clear." Before I could respond, he added something that left me speechless. "We've decided to offer you a position with us. Our records show you had over 40 years of experience at Sullivan & Associates, impeccable attention to detail, and a reputation for integrity, even in the face of fear. We'd be honored if you'd help us rebuild what your son damaged." Tears blurred my vision. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes," Raphael said, smiling softly. "Not out of pity. Out of respect. We need someone like you. Someone who knows what honesty costs." He handed me the offer letter. The position paid $4,000 a month, with full health benefits, and a one-time compensation of $50,000 for the distress. I stared at the numbers, unable to believe them. For so long I had felt stripped of worth. Now someone was valuing me not for my silence, but for my truth. When I left Brenda's office, the air outside felt lighter. Clarice was waiting in her car, and when I told her, she laughed, a deep, relieved sound I hadn't heard in years. "See?" she said. "When you speak truth, even the world that broke you finds a way to listen." That evening, as I sat on Clarice's porch with the offer letter in hand, I realized something profound. Ethan's downfall had not destroyed me. It had exposed the strength I never knew I had. Justice, I realized, doesn't always come from punishment. Sometimes it comes from restoration. The next morning, I signed the contract. For the first time in decades, I wasn't defined by what I'd lost, but by what I'd reclaimed: dignity, purpose, and a future I finally owned. When I finally turned the key in the lock and stepped inside, the house felt like a stranger I once knew intimately. The walls that had absorbed years of shouting, pleading, and whispered prayers now held their breath with me. For the first time in so long, there was no echo of anger, no slamming doors, no trembling anticipation of what mood he'd be in. Just silence, deep, full, almost holy. The living room still smelled faintly of his cologne, sharp and bitter like the memories it carried. The curtains hung just as I'd left them the day I ran, half drawn, as though the house had frozen in time, waiting for me to return. The couch bore a small tear where Ethan had once hurled his phone in a rage because dinner was too cold. The mark was still there, like a scar the house refused to heal. But it didn't make me flinch anymore. I sat there breathing, my chest rising freely for the first time in years. I had paid for this house with decades of double shifts and sleepless nights. Every brick held a piece of me, from the $10,000 I saved after my husband's passing to the last $800 I used to fix the leaking roof one summer when Ethan was too busy studying to help. It wasn't just a house. It was a map of sacrifices, each one I made for love that never learned to love me back. Now, as I ran my hand along the wall, I whispered, "We're home again," as if the house could hear. The first night, I made soup. I didn't measure the salt. I didn't overthink. Just a handful, stirred in slowly, tasting until it felt right. That simple act, something so small, so ordinary, felt like rebellion. I ate at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed low, and for the first time, no one criticized the flavor. The quiet wrapped around me like an embrace. Still, freedom comes with ghosts. At night, I found myself glancing toward the hallway, expecting the sound of heavy footsteps. When I caught my reflection in the dark window, I sometimes saw the woman I used to be, hunched, cautious, apologetic. But then I'd remember, he was behind bars. 16 years. That's what the judge gave him. 16 years for theft, fraud, and assault. I should have felt relief. But what I felt was heavier. A mourning for the son I thought I raised and the man I had to survive. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the air in the house changed. I opened windows that hadn't felt sunlight in months. I scrubbed the kitchen floors until the smell of lemon soap replaced the scent of smoke. I took down the family photo from the hallway, the one where Ethan was smiling beside me, arm draped around my shoulder. I replaced it with a photo of myself standing by the sea, taken by Clarice on a day when I almost laughed again. That picture didn't hide what I'd been through, but it showed what I was becoming, someone who lived despite it all. Every morning, I walked through the garden where the hidden camera had once recorded my truth. The flowers had grown wild, spilling over the path like they, too, were trying to breathe again. I didn't trim them. I let them bloom, reckless and beautiful. When the mailman came that week, he handed me a plain envelope. Inside was a single sheet, an official document confirming that the house, every cent of it, was now solely mine. No more shared accounts, no more signatures tied to his name. I pressed the paper against my chest and wept. That night, as I lay in my own bed, the one I'd been too afraid to sleep in for so long, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. And as the moonlight crept across the floorboards, I realized something. I hadn't just come home. I had reclaimed it, every wall, every breath, every inch of peace he once tried to steal. And for the first time, the quiet didn't scare me. It comforted me. It was proof that I had survived, and that my silence, at last, was my own. Thanks for spending time with this story. If it resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone else may need to hear it too. Watch another real-life journey by clicking on the left, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.